Arizona, homeowner's best friend.
Continuing our conversation, history of Arizona and the development of the Phoenix metro area with historical architect Don Ryden and city historian Steve Schumacher. And Don, I ended last week with kind of a poking fun at a building. You know, we were talking about the Arizona State Capitol and just this glorious building and the copper dome and the angel on top that's a weather vane. And I'm like, so how do we go from a beautiful building like that and stack something so ugly as our current Governor Tower next to it? Now, I will say, I made fun of what used to be the Super Salad. I think it's a gun store now in Metro Center that has that.
The bank, yeah.
Yeah, it was a form. Well, I made fun of that at a previous broadcast, and the gentleman that was in, he said, well, you know, as ugly as it is, the whole point behind that was I-17 wasn't there yet. It was kind of down in a little sunken area, and they needed something visible so people driving could use it as a navigational beacon. I said, okay, all right, it makes perfect sense now. I can appreciate that, and I will retract my statement of it being a horrible building and pointless and should be torn down. So correct me here on my stance on, like, how do you go from, you know, what's now the Arizona Capitol Museum to something that doesn't even match or look the same, or it just seems totally disconnected?
Well, it's because the legislators and the architects in each of our eras thus far have been more concerned about designing buildings to the time rather than to the region. It's an architecture of fleeting styles instead of timeless place. And so what happens is you get the Italian Renaissance Revival capital, you get the modern new formalism of the House and Senate buildings flanking the Capitol, and then finally in about 1973 you get a tower which was very inexpensive and long-lasting, built of concrete, called brutalism.
And so you could look at all of that and know, kind of like a time frame history explained right before your eyes.
Yes.
Just knowing the age of what was contemporary in architecture.
Right, at that time. And so in 1959, when they were going to build the House and the Senate buildings, Frank Lloyd Wright took it upon himself to berate the legislature for not building something that was of Arizona, of the place. And he designed a whole new capitol for free to be placed in Papago Park. And it was organic architecture, and it was called the Oasis.
Oh, I've never seen that sketch. I guess it's around someplace, huh?
Oh, yes. Here, put up the slides there. Here, click, click, click,
wow.
click, click, for the radio audience. See?
I never knew that.
It had big towers and beautiful shade screens built on hexagons. What Wright didn't realize is that he couldn't build it there because if the Capitol moved, then all the land would go back to the original owners that donated the Capitol.
Oh, small detail.
A little detail.
A small detail. Yeah. Well, one of the interesting little details that we're uncovering here in the unfolding story of the city of Phoenix. And
there you go,
Steve. You were talking a little bit about the role of the WPA.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that happened. The Depression hit the Phoenix area, but not quite as hard as the East Coast and not as early as the East Coast because Phoenix was pretty much agriculture-based, but a lot of the investment money that Phoenix depended on from the East Coast and Chicago dried up after a while. So Phoenix was impacted, but there wasn't a lot of the food lines and those kind of things. So Franklin Roosevelt, in his wisdom at the time, put together the Civilian Conservation Corps, the WPA, and Phoenix benefited incredibly from that. I mean, Candle Park, the fairgrounds, South Mountain Park, Papago Park, a lot of the park structures and the infrastructure of the various parks around the valley were tied to the WPA. So we are beholden in many ways to the federal government, even though independent Arizona, we don't like to think that way. But that's true. It's really true.
And so then we get through that. We get through World War II. A lot of folks have been sent here for their aeronautic training and decide pretty nice place to stay. We finish World War II, and now we're moving well north of 100,000 people pretty quickly. Don, where does that start? I mean, where does that go?
Well, I suppose part of it has to do with the fact that some of the first suburban house developments got started by Webb, who got the contract with Goodyear Rubber and Tire to build worker housing, little ranch houses on 40 acres out in Goodyear. And that set the pattern for buying up agricultural land fairly cheap, and making a fortune in single-family houses. Used to be in the 20s and 30s, all of the houses in the neighborhoods were built one house at a time. Maybe a builder might get 5 or 6 lots, or maybe a whole block. But after the war, these developers like Webb and John F. Long, Cavalier, and so forth, they would buy up huge acreage of farms and start cranking out houses using the Henry Ford manufacturing principle, but instead of having houses on a conveyor belt, they put the workers on the conveyor belt, and they just went down the block and built one house at a time. Perhaps you're familiar with that process, Mr. Romero.
I started strapping on a nail belt about 1973, and worked several subdivisions in the Maryvale area and Glendale area, and there was no such thing as a model home. You built the entire subdivision, and you didn't pre-sell a thing, and you didn't give any of the buyers any choice of color or window selection. You gave them nothing. And then they would close the gates and announce what day they're going to open the subdivision, and everybody was given a red sold tag. And when the gates opened, you literally ran to the house you wanted. And the first one to hang a sold sign on the front door, they started writing up the papers.
That sounds just like the Oklahoma land rush.
Man,
those Sooners.
It was. And then somebody got the idea, let's give buyers choices.
What?
And
competition. Yeah.
Let's build 7 models and stage them, and then let people pick their lot and put which, I want the Catalina model on lot 17.
Exactly. And that's how it worked, because it did get more competitive as they went along. After the war, if you built it, they would come, because there was such a pent-up market waiting to start families in beautiful sunny Phoenix that you didn't need to have all of these choices.
And we're fine. We're comfortable with evap cooling because we don't know any better.
Yeah, well, I'm old enough to remember sleeping under wet sheets on an army cot in the backyard in August when the humidity was so high. So,
Well, we have Motorola to thank for a lot of the refrigeration that we have now, because they had employees and their machinery and their quote-unquote computers and so forth needed temperature control. And so these people would be at work with the refrigeration going, and then they would go home to the swamp cooler in August and go, this has got to change. So, yeah.
So it was really the Goettl Brothers here in town in the 1930s when
residential equipment,
when residential swamp coolers, evaporative cooling, became practical and widespread. So we have Phoenix's growth to thank to the Goettls and companies like theirs for air conditioning and for the swamp coolers, and also to Superlight Block, who had the Aggregate to make the lightweight concrete blocks that you, even still today, Rosie, you are promoting that kind of construction. It's very good and very solid material. So Arizona and Phoenix grew on air conditioning, aggregate, and automobiles.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember a debate we had when I was in the School of Engineering, ASU, and the debate, we were just beginning in the 70s to start framing homes as opposed to masonry homes, because so many of the Suggs and the John F. Long, I mean, those were all solid masonry homes. They were just pieces of art. And we had a debate as to whether or not the future would be frame or masonry. And I actually debated that framing was going to be the wave of the future because it was so much easier to modify later in additions and in closing rooms and things like that. And at that point, it was all still about cost competitive.
Oh yes, it comes down to the economy.
It does.
Of profitability of building the home, and to come up with designs that were both functional and appealing to the new owners.
Now we're talking a city of 500,000 and growing quickly, and we've got traffic, and I mean, what role does the automobile play? Not only in Phoenix, but in Arizona in general. I guess that goes to many places. But boy, without transportation,
right? Transportation is, I suppose, one of the issues that creates the sprawl that we see in and around Phoenix and the metro area, where every family had to have an automobile, maybe two.
Oh yeah,
and why homes originally had carports. They were cheaper than garages, but you got to show off your tail fins
there you go.
to the neighbors to show how successful you were.
Who took over the master planning of Phoenix as it starts just exploding in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s?
Well, there was a master plan in place in 1922, but that went all out the window with the Depression and the war and then the automobile. And so things happened so quickly, and the land of the farms was sold out so fast that the city of Phoenix and their zoning plan just went out the window. And so it was just kind of Wild West again, and that's what caused the sprawl. And to serve these neighborhoods, shopping centers were created.
And I want to talk about that. And we've got to go from the mid-50s to 2024 in the last segment, which lasts 6 minutes.
Rosie on the house, every Arizona home.